Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the suggestion that our latest Health Secretary, Stephen Barclay, is trying to play political games in facing down striking nurses rather than make any effort to negotiate. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So first of all, always worth explaining the core issue around the industrial action. Nurses are not known for going on strike after all. In fact, they just don't. NHS nurses are mostly paid at like band 5. When the Tories came to power, the lower end of that scale was £21,176 a year and the upper end was £27,534. Now, taking inflation into account, this would translate to a range of pay from £29,885 to £38,857 now. In reality, that actual pay range right now is between £27,055 to £32,934. Sorry. So that is a real terms pay cut since the Tories have been in office of 9.5% at the bottom end and 15.2% at the top end of that scale. So it's really this simple. Under no circumstances should nurses or anyone else have received a real terms pay cut of any amount over a period of 12 years. And certainly not be putting up with one so large. You know, you can sort of understand it. If your pay increases are at or above inflation and over time, you know, your pay's keeping up with where it was, you know, where in terms of real terms, and then there's a really bad year, there's a recession hits or something like that and goes down a bit in real terms, but then over the next few years it's corrected, that would be fine. People would take that. There wouldn't be all this industrial action if that was the situation. But it's not. And the government's current proposal for a pay offer is another 7% real terms pay cut on top of the cuts they've already had with the Tories in power. That's not tempting, isn't it? We've made a very generous pay offer of 7% pay cut. No, thank you. It's obscene, really. Wouldn't even matter if nurses were paid several times the median income and could still afford the cost of living, like MPs. It's just wrong. However, nurses are not paid those good wages, and a distressing high number have to use food banks these days. In addition, their work is much more difficult than it was when the Tories took over. They're having to manage with fewer resources, including colleagues, in order to deal with the ever-increasing demand of propping up an undermined health service. It's causing nurses to leave the NHS in record numbers, heaping further stress and misery on those who remain. You know, their cause is beyond doubt. And although the public can be a bit funny when emergency workers strike, they are generally on the side of striking workers this year, so many people can feel what they feel for themselves. So there's a lot of empathy. It's impossible for all but the most blinkered and closeted, to see that people are really struggling with the cost of living here. But Steve Barclay, who became the Health Secretary for the second time this year when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, it's all been changed. So he's saying it's simply not possible to accede to the pay rise the unions are demanding. And it's like, well, yeah, that might be true in the immediate term. But I mean, I did say the government could easily avert the strikes by offering a serious pay rise that takes the edge off the cost of living and then a commitment to keep going until the salaries are back up to decent levels over the next few years. That would be straightforward. Indeed, Scottish nurses accepted what is still a below inflation pay offer. Although nurses in Scotland and Wales, it has to be said, are paid much more than those in England, before these strikes. The difference it makes when you don't have the Tories deciding these matters. Of course, if you read the articles where the Tories are quoted, they'll deny that they decide these matters. Oh, nothing to do with us. We're just following the advice of the Independent Pay Review Board. And indeed, the Pay Review Board is independent. But although the people are independent, they don't just make it up themselves. They follow a process set down for them by the government. So all the Pay Review Board really does is put together a jigsaw set to them by the government. So it's still the government deciding. It doesn't take a lot of working out. Under non-Tory governments, nurses' pay goes up much further than under Tory governments. Like, when you can see the pattern over a span of decades, it's unmistakable. But Labour are accusing Barclay of playing a political game in not even negotiating. And there's a lot of credibility to his accusation, I think for two reasons. First, the clearest, is there's never a reason not to sit down at the table for pay discussions. Like, even if you don't think you're getting anywhere, if everyone seems to be a bit stubborn and that's your belief, everyone knows that the dispute only ends when there's an agreement. So by definition, a stakeholder refusing to take their seat at the table is saying that they want to prolong the dispute. There's no other way of looking at it, because the dispute doesn't get resolved until there's an agreement. It's all very well the Tories trying to blame Labour for these strikes. It's the Tories blocking any possibility of progress, as they've done for various disputes for about half a year now. Then the second reason is the Tories have agreed to negotiate properly when they wanted to. You know, when Liz Truss became Prime Minister for that brief spell, remember that? Her new Justice Secretary, Brandon Lewis, agreed a deal that ended the barristers' strikes quite quickly. Much to the annoyance of Dominic Raab, I suspect. But if they're willing to talk to some groups but not others, it does show that they can respond when they can be bothered. And it seems to me, and clearly others as well, that the government want to recreate a battle with unions to replicate the early days of Thatcher. You know, Thatcher, when she came to power, was actually a little bit afraid of the unions. Unions were very powerful. You could argue too powerful in the 70s. But they... it wasn't so much the unions, I think. I think it was the leaders of the unions not always taking enough account of their members. But nonetheless, Thatcher actually initially was afraid of the unions. And then there was a particular strike. I think it was a textile factory or something. I can't remember. There was a particular moment, I was very young, where the strike was broken. Not illegally. The employer just faced them down and said, no. And then that emboldened Thatcher to then take on the unions. And, you know, so I think they're trying to recreate that. I think they think that the Tories do actually have this this real disdain for unions. They don't like them. You know, even though nowadays you cannot complain about unions these days because they have to ballot members for strike action. There's no, you know, a union leader saying, right, we're going on strike. They have to ballot the members. And it's a much more rigorous process than it is for our own elections. But the Conservatives seem to have identified nurses as the easiest target. And this could be due to a combination of various factors. You know, nurses, like I say, don't strike. In fact, the strike action this month of NHS nurses in England will be the first one ever. The government presumably judged this to indicate that they're a bit weak-willed because they've never done it before. You know, and the workers are not used to industrial action. Oh, they'll feel guilty. We'll play on their guilt. And because nurses don't actually strike, they may imagine that the Royal College of Nursing, who's leading this, will let its inexperience in such matters show, as if they wouldn't be able to get advice from more experienced organisers of industrial action. But then there's public opinion. Absolutely vital. As long as the public are broadly on the side of the striking workers, including nurses, unions can fight on. And the government will have, you know, correctly identified that actually where the public are a bit softer on supporting strike action, it is with emergency service workers. You know, it doesn't matter that Tory voters will always be broadly against the strikes. That's fine. If the government's behaviour so disgusts other voters, they may be more determined to show up at the next election and make their vote count. You know, this is a gamble for the Tories. You know, it's how much they are willing to risk in order to avoid making the very wealthy pay their fair share. They're willing to engage in a battle which, if they lose, could cost them even more seats at the next election where they're already expecting to lose a load. You know, at a time when the Tories are trying to minimise electoral damage in 2024, they're actually taking a very questionable risk here. You know, get it wrong. They energise a load of voters against them. But even if they do win this battle, they don't gain any votes. Like, the only people in favour of nurses getting pay cuts of like 20% are those who already vote Tory. But therein lies their greatest problem as well. In the most severe cost of living crisis in my lifetime, and with us at the start, not the end, the start of what could be a terrible recession, how can a profession where already a large number of them have to use food banks accept even heftier real terms pay cuts? You know, this could be another case of the government fundamentally failing to understand that this isn't a case of nurses just wanting more, jumping on the bandwagon with other strikers, or even a case of wanting to correct a perceived injustice. Many of them cannot afford to live on a nurse's salary. They cannot afford enough food, lighting or heating at home. Their families are suffering as well. Going without purely for the sake of greedy individuals who could pay a decent amount of tax to solve the whole problem and not even notice the difference to their standard of living. But the Tories seem to have decided that they need to end the strikes because they probably understand that they will be blamed for the economic hits. There's always an economic hit with strikes. and they will be blamed for it later on. But they don't want to actually pay people a fair wage, because that's the easiest way. There would never need to have been any strikes this year, because that's what it's really about. The government feel it's such a matter of principle that wealthy people should not pay much into the public purse that they're willing to risk a major backfire if it goes wrong. Or maybe they're not even thinking about the risks because of the ever problematic issue of modern Tories putting people into cabinet who don't really consider risks because failure in their own personal lives has never come with serious consequences. But as someone who does look at life, life's decisions in terms of risk-reward calculations, and I can be reckless at times, I just see this fight as pointless. I'm not saying that the government can't somehow achieve their aims. I'm not saying they are definitely onto a loser here. Although with such widespread industrial action, it's a tough battle for the Tories here. But it's not impossible. It's just that the reward is of no value to them. Their reward is more economic damage, more damage to our public services. That's what they want to achieve. I mean, that is what they are aiming for, national harm. And the risk to them, when they are already set to lose 100, 150 seats at the next election, is to maybe lose a load more on top if they get this badly wrong. Because a load of people who might be sat at home thinking, well, I don't like any of the parties, I'm not going to vote for anyone, may look at this and go, well, I don't really like any of the parties, but I really hate the Tories, and go out and vote. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.